initially I think we probably made many more mistakes than we had successes, and the only thing we had on our side was conviction it was going to work and time, commitment.
William, lovely to see you. Thanks for coming along.
Lovely to be here, Micah.
Excellent. I was discussing with Lulu, who's her first time on the podcast. Usually she's behind the camera and the microphone.
Great hopes for Lulu.
I've got great hopes for Lulu too, as we all have. So I was saying to her that when I first met you at New Covent Garden Soup, that you were my boss's boss's boss. But it's been 27 years since we met.
What am I now?
You're still, well, I would consider you a friend and also my boss.
And your guest.
And my guest.
Be nice to me.
Yes, exactly. But the thing that was interesting was that when I said 27 years, Lulu, she exclaimed, I'm only 26.
I know.
So
I didn't know she was 26,
yeah,
but it's incredible.
We met before Lulu was
I know.
So
it's a long time ago.
Long time ago.
So let's not sound like we're a pair of old whatevers.
Yes,
and try and impress Lulu and your other listeners, your other young listeners.
Exactly, lots of young listeners. So before we get cracking, so I want to talk to you a lot about your experience in sort of building brands and investing in brands and leadership and so forth, building teams. Is if you can just give a quick introduction of how you sort of got to where you are now.
Quick introduction. So I grew up on a farm in East Anglia. It was a typical family, quite big farm, but lots of different things going on. And it was an idyllic childhood where, my playground was the farm. And as I got older, that's where I started working. And, it's all I kind of knew. When people said, what do you want to do? What do you want to do in life? I said, I want to be a farmer, because that's what farmers' children tended to say. And anyway, so that's sort of my childhood. Then I don't know, something happened. I went off to university. Before I went off to university, I joined the army. And I suppose I kind of started looking at the rest of the world and realising that, there was more to life than our idyllic farm. And I don't know, something, I sort of got onto a different track, which was, going to London after university. I read law at university, became a barrister. That was quite interesting, but I thought I needed to do something else. Don't know why I thought I needed to do something else, but I did, and became an investment banker. And then I went and did an MBA in France at a business school in Fontainebleau, and actually realised that I'd first of all realised that I was pretty unemployable, and perhaps that was the sort of farming thing. I was sort of used to working in a family business where you kind of did your own thing. And so working in this very structured environment, working in, traditional roles, which I had no background in at all, I found it quite sort of scary. And the other thing is that I realized, I had developed a love of food, and maybe that was in my DNA because, I grew up on a farm and we grew lots of different crops. Although I don't remember it being a very sort of foodie environment. It was sort of the beginnings of industrial farming in the 1970s. But we had a market garden, so in the summer I would work there and I'd pick beans and I'd pick beetroot and I'd pick everything. And what I do remember vividly was at the end of the drive, I set up a stall and I started selling, I think it was rhubarb, and I think there was a surplus of rhubarb, and I started selling it, and the farm was very close to the A1, and so the traffic was quite busy even in those days. And I remember people stopping and buying stuff, and I realised they were buying it because they actually wanted it, not because they were being nice to a sort of young bloke, but they were being not. And I got this huge buzz out of selling something that people really wanted. And actually, perhaps that sort of tells us about why I got into food, or why I was already in food. And actually, perhaps the interesting and slightly sort of sad thing was I remember my dad driving up when I was well into my selling mode and had a tin full of coins. And he said, we don't need to do this. I think he said anymore. I've probably made all this up, but I just remember being crushed by him, and he was so not the crushing dad. But he spent his life trying to get farmers to cooperate, to do all their selling as a group, and he was a part of the cooperative movement, and so he used to put a big cooperative together. And he didn't like farmers all selling one by one and competing with each other. And and he felt that, you know, marketing should be done by some professionals and farmers should just sort of do the ploughing and everything. So anyway, that's I think that was the awakening of the brand builder, the food brand builder in me, was that I just liked selling really good stuff that people liked, and I still do.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. I have always wondered, I suppose, is that this is what I've known you as, someone who's built up brands. You know, you've seen an opportunity where there's been someone who's started a brand. Maybe it doesn't look right, maybe, but there's a lot of potential there. So what attracted you to that rather than starting your own brands?
Well, I think what happened was Covent Garden Soup Company, where you and I met. I'd had a similar idea. So, you know, fast forward a bit from my stall, and I met a girl at university who said, "Oh, you're a farmer. I've got a farm too. And do you want to come and see it?" Which was quite cool. And so I went to see it, and about 15 years later, I married her. And she had inherited a farm from a great uncle. And so, you know, it was brilliant in that there were no parents there to cramp our style, but we would have friends to stay. And the only disadvantage of no parents is there's no food. And so I learned to cook, and I just used to make lots and lots of soup. Because I was getting a bit disenchanted with my career at the time, you know, various friends said, "Well, you ought to start a business." So I had this idea of making soup, and then somebody nicked my idea, and one of these friends sent me a flattened carton of carrot and coriander, which they bought in their corner shop, and said, you know, it said "loser" on the top. This is what happens when you did that.
Great friend,
yeah. She remains a great friend. And so I sort of set about stalking the founder of Covent Garden Soup, and really just wanted a job there because I just knew it was going to work, and I loved that whole idea. So, you know, I didn't have this brilliant business idea that there were going to be lots of founders of businesses who weren't very good at running their businesses, and I could come in and sort of run them better. I mean, for a start, I couldn't have run it. And when I got to Covent Garden Soup Company, apart from the fact I had an MBA, which taught you virtually nothing practical, but it just so happened that that's how I got into Covent Garden Soup. I survived long enough to work out how to run a business, and then after that, you know, it's kind of obvious. You carry on. You find people who've got a great idea. You think that's a great idea, but you could do it a little bit better if you did X, Y, and Z. And so I've sort of become, I don't know what you call it, sort of brand fixer or whatever.
Yeah.
But I find the founder entrepreneur's energy and enthusiasm very attractive. I think a lot of business people find it very scary. I mean, you know what I mean. You know, I mean, we used the word passion at Covent Garden Soup before anybody else did.
Yeah.
And now it's overused, but that sort of passion to make things, you know, and get it absolutely right, and you know, no compromises or whatever. I find that really attractive. So, you know, yeah, it makes sense that I do what I do.
Yeah, and so that's why you sort of decided to do something like that, where you sort of fell into it a bit, but with something you'd already had an idea of. But you've always been attracted to that rather than go into like a big brand, a multinational type thing, where maybe there isn't that sort of excitement of the founder being there. Would that be? Well,
right? Probably, but I mean, I think if I'd gone straight from university to work for one of the big brands, it would have been, I'd have been thrilled about the job. But I decided to go from university to work for a big bank, or to become a barrister and then a banker. And I suppose I worked out there that I wasn't very good in big organisations. Yeah. Turns out I'm great in big organisations. I'm just
now you are.
Now I am. Just turns out I wasn't really willing to do the 25 years of hard yards to get to the top. But
go straight to the top.
If you go straight to the top,
it's brilliant. Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, it's great. I'm not very good at I'm not very good on planes. I'm not very good with the sort of disembodied voice telling you that, to enjoy your flight and sit back. I'd much rather be on a bumpy little plane where you can actually chat to the pilot. I don't need to be flying the plane. I don't need to be running it, but I do need to sort of have a conversation with people. Yeah,
that makes sense. You were saying when you were first at New Covent Garden Soup that you did a lot of sort of learning on the job. And, because you went in there with your MBA and your other experience, but nothing particular to the sort of food and beverage industry. And what I've heard is that what you say is that, those first few years were really just about learning it and then getting used to it. But there must have been sort of certain things that, especially at this point, sort of early in your food and drink career, where mistakes were made, but that's where you almost learn more, I would have thought. And there are sort of a particular things where you, like instances where you go, right, I really learned from doing this, and this is what I pass on to people.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, there's absolutely no way that I and the rest of the team who you knew well should have been put in charge of a business that was already struggling quite seriously. Because whilst we were passionate and we were prepared to work all hours God gave us, we hadn't got any sort of previous success behind us. We had a very good chair who came in twice a week, who sort of kind of corralled us and gave us some sort of top tips. And we learned a massive amount from him. But so initially I think we probably made many more mistakes than we had successes, and the only thing we had on our side was conviction it was going to work and time, commitment. But I mean, over time, you sort of, we began to realize that some things were beginning to work. I mean, actually, one of the first things he taught me was the first day that I was there, and Jeff, he wasn't the chair at that time, but he arrived on the same day as me, and he described what was going on as watching his children at the weekend, who were, I don't know, kind of under the age of 10. They'd been playing rugby and playing mini rugby, and he said it's just like that, where everybody is chasing the ball and nobody's playing in position.
Yeah.
And he said, you can't fault the commitment, but it's just rubbish because no one ever scores a try because everyone's on top of the ball the whole time.
It's just moving
so occasionally it pops out and then there's no one to pick it up and they just pile on top of it. And it's such a good analogy. Well, it is if you watch anyone playing rugby, but it's sort of he was so right. And so one of the first things he got us to do was to not just give ourselves job titles, because we sort of had those already, but actually to play in position.
Yeah.
And so, of course, if you're in an early stage business and it's all hands to the pump, of course you don't just sort of say, well, I'm not helping. I'm watching you all. If a lorry needs unloading, you stop doing your finance director job. But if the finance director's weighing out coriander on the shop floor and not kind of keeping the score for you, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So I think it sounds so obvious but so often these small businesses, particularly when they're under-resourced and they attract people who kind of like rolling their sleeves up, forget that. That, you do need someone to sort of be in charge of the key areas.
Yeah, yeah. So from Covent Garden Soup, you then move through, well, I've stayed sort of at your coattails at Green and Black.
Not sure about the coattails bit, but anyway, yeah.
And now Cawston Press, but you've worked on loads of other brands as well, but definitely have chosen these very sort of, I'd say, pretty iconic sort of food and drink brands that very much are at the sort of premium end of the tastes. So you've always gone for something that I think excites you taste wise. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it goes back to the stall at the end of the farm drive, in that I want people to be blown away by what we're selling. I think that's the excitement. I mean, I would be rubbish at selling stuff that people don't really want. I'm sure there are people who are really good at selling things. We all know them that you didn't really want. But I think something that that is tastes amazing and also is making the world a better place some way or another. I mean, I've always been interested in politics and always thought I'd go into politics, and I actually realised that by doing what we're doing, what you do, it's everything's politics. We're shaping the future, and okay, maybe you're not changing the nation's fortune, but I'm not sure who does achieve that anyway. But you are, you're making things better, whether it's diet, whether it's your suppliers or whatever. And so I'm very attracted by that. And when we sold Covent Garden Soup, it was by the time we sold it, it was quite an iconic brand. I mean, it wasn't particularly big, but it was supposedly the most profitable as a percentage of food and drink brands around at the time. And we were it was quite sort of big news when we sold it, and we were told you could go and buy any business you like. You could sort of we spoke to lots of people who were sort of getting rid of divisions from their bigger businesses, and we had plenty of people willing to finance those, but the businesses they were shedding was just so uninspiring. They were part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So when we met Craig and he was struggling with his tiny little range of food at Whole Earth Food, and this even tinier.
It wasn't a tiny range; it was quite a lot of things.
It was an enormous
huge
range. It was a huge range and a tiny turnover of food. Yeah, I mean, Craig was sort of single-handedly trying to feed, all 7 organic devotees in Britain with their entire
Very
diet.
well.
And so when we found him, we just thought this was just sort of perfect for us. It was a challenge because it didn't seem to be working, even though actually there were a lot more than 7 organic people by then, and it was a growing market. So why wasn't it working? So, everything about it was very, very appealing. And all of the people we were talking to in the city said, oh, what a shame, You're not doing a sort of £100 million, £200 million deal. You're doing a sort of one that we can't even sort of focus on. It's so small. But it was just right for us. And, that's where my heart is. Although I do, I work in big businesses now, and it's really exciting, and there's a different set of problems there, and actually a lot of similarities as well.
But I remember when I got the call from Caroline, who was my boss's boss at New Covent Garden, and then my boss at Green and Blacks, and she phoned me up and said, "Oh, do you want to come? We just bought this company. Do you want to come along and help? We don't know how it's going to go because it's the finances. We don't know how they're going to go, but maybe for 3 months we'll see how it goes." So I said, "Yeah, brilliant." I was just out of university, I just graduated, a bit late, but I had done. So I'd moved about a bit, and then after 3 months, I was given just the files of everything, chocolate plus all the Whole Earth foods.
Yeah,
just get on with those. Yeah, all right. Yeah. And then after 3 months, I said to Caroline, "Have I still got a job?" "Oh yeah. Haven't I told you?" It's that sort of thing. But it was exciting. It was exactly what you say. It was like working on lots of things. It was quick moving, and in an industry that was definitely growing, i.e. organic foods and drink. And it was a great place to work and great people as well. And this leads me on to a bit is how you choose your, especially with a business that you're building up like that, how do you choose both your sort of your SLT, your senior leadership team, but also other employees? How do you build that sort of that camaraderie and so forth?
Well, I think, culture is everything, isn't it? And I mean, I think to some extent it falls into place. Well, it doesn't fall into place because you see so many places where it doesn't work. I mean, so on senior leadership team, I've always thought, your ambition is to grow fast, and so trying to fill the key roles for people who are overqualified to do the job has to be the right thing to do. Of course, a lot of those people need paying more than you can afford, and so you're endlessly sort of compromising on all of that. But trying to attract enough people who are kind of slightly embarrassed that you're only turning over $1 million, and you really, at least they'd like to be turning over 5 million or 10 million, to tell their mates, in the pub that. So that sort of, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, why changing people every year because you've got a bit bigger and the challenge got bigger just doesn't work. So you don't want to be held back by people who are just never going to make the grade. So having people who are well in advance of the stage of the business. I mean, that's definitely what we managed to do at Green and Blacks, Whole Earth and Green and Blacks. Whereas at Covent Garden, we definitely were learning on the job. And I think, our shareholders probably had to indulge the fact that for 2 or 3 years, we didn't do as well as we could have done if we'd had similar experience beforehand. So I think that's the first thing. I mean, as far as culture is concerned, and as far as sort of everyone getting on, I mean, I think it's getting, you said it was really exciting or whatever, and perhaps you positioned it as being a bit naive how you took the job, but you kind of knew what you were looking for. You decided to go into your career, later than some. So I suspect you were probably quite demanding, even though you might not have thought about it at the time. And so finding people who, the challenge is actually getting people to come and work for a business that doesn't have any money and is in the wrong end of town or that sort of thing. So getting people who can overcome that is a great start. Then just making people feel like they've made the right decision. And I'm not sure we've always got that right. I mean, I feel very, very firmly, strongly now that, the most important person in your business is the person who joined last week, because, they're the ones who most recently had to work out why they were going to leave or take, not go down a career path and to come to you. So listening to them, making them feel valued, listening to their great new ideas, which are quite similar to the ideas that you had a year ago, but don't tell them that, you tried that last year and it didn't work. All of that sort of stuff I think is really important. And I think entrepreneurs sometimes aren't very good at that. I think entrepreneurs can be very charismatic, and so they attract people, and their ideas attract people, and then they sort of take that for granted. I think it's a sweeping generalization, but I've just noticed it. And I think that, so quite often, and another characteristic of the classic entrepreneur is that, they feel very insecure about the things that they're weak on. So if they think that, they desperately need a really good finance director, and they go out and they find the person who they think will, pass as muster. And we're all human. We're all mortal, and so we're not brilliant at everything. And so when the finance director proves to be only 90% brilliant, they get really annoyed, and then they start undermining the finance director or the sales director. The sales director they don't trust anymore, and so. When the sales director is going to Sainsbury's, the founder decides they need to go along with them and starts undermining them. And then the sales director gets a bit fed up with this and gets more and more fed up and then leaves. And then word gets out on the street that actually this is the nightmare place to work. And then the rot has already set in, and, somebody else comes and takes a role and they're not as good as the person who's just left. And so often I think that's how things go wrong. I mean, it tends to accompany worsening financial situation, and so people tend to just remember that bit. But what caused the problem was probably, first of all, not getting as great people as you could in the first place, and then hanging on to them, treating them like the gods that they need to be treated like, respecting them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember joining, the Whole Earth Foods and Green and Blacks, because it was a brand that I was proud to work on, because I was very much from a food and drink background for worked in the wine industry and so forth. So that was crucial for me. I couldn't work on something I wasn't prepared to stand by. But it was also the teams that really, both at Whole Earth, Green and Blacks, but also at Cawston. And hopefully we brought it on to Tastehead as well. To me, it's the most important thing, is getting that team right, and to enjoy working there, to enjoy going in every day and make friends for life. I think I've been very lucky in that respect, I think, to be able to do that, because I don't think everyone is able to do that at work.
No, and I think you can challenge this because you've done everything I've done, but I actually think Cawston in a way is the best of all. I mean, I was very conscious when we started Cawston that, the assumption that I made that everyone loved working at the previous brands because they were so cool and whatever. Covent Garden Soup, as you well remember, was mainly a manufacturing business, and it wasn't actually always that great in the factory. It was sometimes very hot,
always smells of onions. Always.
And so we all thought that this was this brilliant business that everybody wanted to serve to their friends for supper tonight, but actually perhaps we weren't as brilliant at remembering the people who were making it. And so we respected them and we were all friendly and whatever. But I just think that Cawston, when we started employing people at Cawston, and when Steve, who runs it, came, I remember saying to him, I want this to be the best place to work in town. And he says that's the reason why he took the job. He had a nice job at Unilever. So,
he did, yeah.
And neither of us knew what we meant by that, and I don't think we still do. And I think we got it wrong in part, because I think by telling everybody this is going to be the best place to work in town, people come up with their own interpretation, and sometimes it's not consistent with the, what's great for the business. So I think we've learned that, but along the way, that the best place to work in town involves some compromise. But I hope that everybody who works there feels a sort of sense of ownership, and the fact that they do have a strong sort of agency in making it the best place. Yeah. And it's only great because of what they put into it as well. It's not some person.
No, that's true. But I suppose you have to be there to let it happen, and give people the chance to do that.
Of course.
Obviously, you've built brands and bought some and grown them. One thing, obviously, as well, is you've exited brands. So it'd be quite interesting for for our listeners who are range from anything from startups through to sort of SMEs and bigger, but especially the startups who are building their own brands, is maybe some experience of, how you've exited, what gave you the sort of impetus to exit when you did, and so forth.
Well, I mean, for Covent Garden Soup, we were largely owned or significantly owned by an institution, so we always knew that they would want an exit. Actually, unusually considering that fact, they were not pressing us perhaps as much as they might have done. But I think we had this sense that, it wasn't our business. I mean, we owned shares in it, but, we'd taken it from being a great idea that was losing lots of money to a great idea that was winning lots of fans and actually making lots of money. And probably, the final chapter of that journey was to find, a third party that was going to attribute some value to it. So I think we were probably putting more pressure on ourselves than our backers were at the time. Anyway, whatever it was, we decided to do it. And it wasn't actually that easy to exit. I'd been taken out to lunch so many times by, the obvious people who might have wanted to buy us. And they all said, when the moment's right, let us know. And so we did, and we hired a very expensive American bank to sort of represent us. And one by one, all of these potential acquirers dropped out. Not because they found something sort of, what they found was that they did lots of market research that we'd never been able to afford to do, and they found that our consumers were so passionate about what we did that they thought that they just wouldn't like us as much if we belonged to one of the big international brands, and so I think they felt that our sort of tone of voice, everything about us was small and private and independent, and so actually in the end it was quite difficult to find a buyer, but we did, and I suppose that sort of coloured our sort of judgment and what we did next. So when we bought Whole Earth and Green and Blacks, for a start we had two brands and not a lot of money to put behind even one of them. And I think there was a sense of, well, we're going to start this journey all over again. It took nearly 10 years the first time round. What if nobody wants to buy us? So we sort of kind of pre-sold Green and Blacks. Well, we pre-sold both of them. We went round to people who might eventually want to buy us, and Cadbury said, "Well, we'd definitely be interested in Green and Blacks if you deliver the plan, but not a Whole Earth." And we found somebody else who said the opposite. So we thought, well, this is quite good. We've got a roadmap now to a good outcome, and so we accepted it. And it was quite a challenging plan, which we didn't believe we could deliver, but there we go, we did. And more. And so when we actually came to the point where Cadbury's particularly, we'd sold Whole Earth by then, the Cadbury's said, well, now's the time we want to exit. We think, well, didn't really want to sell it. But you can't win, can you? I mean, exactly. There was a good reason for us doing it, but based on the experience of one, we perhaps shouldn't have done that. At Green and Blacks, we would have had more options, but it was a good outcome for everybody.
Of course, yeah.
And having done it once, selling Covent Garden Soup, which was so much our baby. I mean, we kind of, it was everything, and it was sort of defined us in a way. We were the guys who, you turn up to supper somewhere in London and they'd be serving Covent Garden Soup, and they might not, most of the guests might not know you, and then it's not exactly, I don't know, it's not like sort of Elvis Presley turning up, but it was we were sort of stars. We were culinary stars, and then we sold it. Then we were nobody.
But also that was a time, I suppose, when it was a new type of product. No one had done a fresh soup before, and it was that sort of quite near the start of the sort of ready meals. But this was a whole food as well. It wasn't like it didn't have a huge ingredient list, so it felt like someone was doing something quite new and different, and people felt it was their brand as well. They didn't want to see it changed at all, which often, that's what I think a great brand is when people think it belongs to them. They don't want to see it changed.
No, I completely agree. And actually, that sort of, that description of sitting, I mean, I remember going to supper with some friends and, quite late in the day of owning Covent Garden Soup, and everybody, I didn't know any else around the table, and she served Covent Garden Soup and put, sprinkled her, whatever stuff to show she'd made it herself, sort of thing. No, she told everyone it was Covent Garden Soup. Everybody around the table knew the person who owned it, ran it, whatever. I'm thinking, well, I've run it for the last 9 years, and I don't know any of you. And you realise that this is a sign of success, where in your customer group, everybody feels a sense of ownership.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not that they were fibbing. It's success has many fathers, and that's kind of that's actually what we try to do. I mean, as you know, that's what we try to do with all of our brands, is to get loads of people out there feeling some sort of sense of ownership that they can go and tell their friends about it.
We talked about, I think, especially at Green and Blacks, about being like cupboard proud. So when people open your cupboards, if they see Green and Black, they're like, yes, it's a brand. Same sort of thing with New Covent Garden Soup, with Fridge Proud, and it's that sort of being proud of brands that you have in your. Do
you remember we used to have all the samples at Green and Blacks, and you grabbed some before you went out in the evening to hand to your friends, and then Cadbury's joined, and they realised that there was a lot of chocolate going out there, where some numbers person said, oh, we need to sort of limit it, and you think, there are so many businesses out there where people don't leave and think, oh, I'm going to take that sort of crap generator that we make in the factory and sort of take it home. It's such a privilege to be working for a business, or have people working for a business who feel proud, that they want to share it with the people.
Share with people who then talk about it to others. I mean,
and that's how they end up knowing the person who ran it, because somebody, they can't remember what the connection was, but
I still get people now. I haven't worked for Green Blacks for years. People still call me the chocolate man. Yeah. So they remember that I worked as on Green and Blacks.
Well, my nearly 30-year-old daughter is called Emily Soup. Not by many people, but there are a few people from the
I'll start calling it that by next year. Yeah.
I think also what's quite interesting off the back of your saying, like, New Covent Garden was doing something different, being the first soup brand. I think even now it still stands out so obviously because of the packaging. They're the only people doing the cardboard packaging in a shelf space where it's all plastic. And again, talking about how the chocolate packaging is so premium and looks so luxury. Yeah. In a time where I guess a lot of people could say that packaging could seem superficial, and the balance between how we know how important taste is of a product, going taste forward or packaging forward. How important is that to you, and how you approach new brands and new products that you're working on? Like, obviously Cawston has a really, really obvious and unique and ownable packaging style as well. At what point when you're starting with these early brands is that a conversation that is had if it's needed?
Well, I think it's, I think the packaging needs to be, it's part of the product, so it needs to be sort of authentic. I mean, Covent Garden Soup, I wasn't there when it was decided to put it into milk cartons, but there was a very clear, the thinking was, that's how people, you're 26, as you've confessed, 20, 30 years ago, most people bought milk in milk cartons. And so, we were trying to explain to people who thought that soup was either made at home in the kitchen or came in cans, that you could get soup of the quality that's made at home made, but you could buy it in a supermarket. And so using a familiar form of packaging that people, associated with probably the freshest thing that you had in your kitchen was a brilliant bit of marketing. The complexity of putting soup into something that was designed either for juice or for a single product was quite ambitious. Yeah. And had we had tons of experience, we wouldn't have done it, and that would have been a great shame because the company wouldn't have been nearly as good. But we did spend about 3 or 4 years trying to work out how to get everything from thin soup to chunky soup into a packaging format that was designed for milk. So absolutely vitally important, and I think otherwise it needs to be authentic. I mean, I'm chocolate. Well, we did lots of different types of chocolate, and we did chocolate sort of in whatever the format. We put bars of chocolate in.
Yeah, but quite early on it changed from it might seem small, but it went from a landscape into portrait. It just had more embossing on it. It just looked more luxury. So the chocolate was always good, and I think we improved that through a number of ways, but. The original packaging looked authentic, but quite not run of the mill, but quite sort of cottage industry.
Yeah, no, agree. But that was the design, not the packaging itself.
Yes,
so the design. So there was a massive shift when we realised that the people who liked the idea of organic food didn't particularly like the idea of organic chocolate, because by the time they got to eating chocolate in the evenings, they'd done their organic bit. And so they didn't want organic chocolate to look kind of like it was healthy or good for the planet particularly. They wanted it to look indulgent. And so, as Micah said, we redesigned it to look very indulgent, very much about you. And then, of course, once people had fallen in love with it, then they could read all about it on the inside wrapper and find out that it was saving the planet and all of that sort of stuff. But it's really important. I think, to your point, Lulu, about Covent Garden Soup was very, very different at the time. The fact that it was in a milk carton, but it was, it was one of the first ready meals. I mean, M&S had just launched chicken Kiev as their. We have called it chicken Kiev now, don't we? But I think it was called chicken Kiev at the time, and it was their first, as far as I recall, it was their first ready meal. And this was only. Well, it was not in your lifetime, but it was in some people's lifetime.
I worked there when I was doing my A-levels, so they were talking 86.
Yeah.
And it was that and the salmon en croûte. They were the top things.
Yeah. And they were the only people doing it.
Yeah, of course.
So this whole... And it was transformational. This idea that you could serve homemade quality soup to people who really valued it but were time poor. This was when, couples were both going to work and working in the same. It transformed. It supported a sort of societal change, and I mean I suppose things have headed off in a different direction from what you and I would think was the right one, which is that not all ready meals, not all things are actually as high quality as they could be, because at the time they were, we only used ingredients that you'd have in your own kitchen. So it was very much, we are cooking for you using the ingredients that you'd have at home. Mm. And that meant that there was a whole load of stuff that we couldn't do. Yeah. But we were determined to do that. This is unless you're a really good cook, this is actually going to be better probably than you could cook at home. And that was a revolutionary thought, which spawned, multi-million, £100 million businesses around the world. So I get I did a talk a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and my wife was in the audience, which is never a good idea. And she said, you just undersell. It's not about you. It's about how meaningful these things are. What we did with chocolate, we took a product that actually in the UK was pretty naff on the whole, and we said, you can eat chocolate like this, and you can improve the lives of the people who have grown the ingredients. And, what's not to like about all of that? And we thought we were selling it at the top end. Well, look at the chocolate fixture now. I mean, it's sort of like, there's dozens of brands that make green and blacks look like sort of cheap. Yeah. Yeah.
Although it's still very good quality chocolate, It's
the best quality, really.
Yeah, yeah. I want to touch on some other bits, because obviously you've done a lot of investing in brands as well. You mentioned Namadi, I think it might have been before we started, but this was someone where you invested in businesses. And I was very sort of interested, and a lot of our listeners, I think, will be about what you were looking for in a brand. What sort of made you sit up and take notice, and what brands maybe got wrong when they were doing their pitches towards you. So some sort of idea around that would be interesting.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if we did mention Namadi, but Namadi was our venture fund, which we set up quite a long time ago to invest in not necessarily all food and drink brands, but just disruptive earlier stage businesses. And I'm not a natural investor. I like rolling my sleeves up and getting involved in running the business. So the investment side of it is something we sort of learned along the way. And if you're buying a business or creating a business from scratch, as we've done more recently with LA Brewery, you have to find, you have to get some money in from outside. So that's the extent of my interest in investing. But I look at a lot of business plans, write a lot of business plans. there's a kind of set format for a business plan. It's like a sort of, university dissertation or whatever. And if you stray from it, you probably get marked down. But essentially, all I'm interested in is show me the product and show me the people who are going to get behind it. Is there a team? A team is more than one person. And the product doesn't have to be perfect, because, a really good team will work out what's wrong with the product and be constantly course correcting it. The worst teams are those that are just saying, when will these people finally get what I'm trying to do? And they keep peddling the same thing. But most ideas that you see at that stage, you don't know why they're wrong, but you know that they're half right and half wrong. You like the analysis. You like the fact that they've identified a gap in the market. They that it makes sense. You can see the wind is blowing in the right direction. Whether this execution that you're being shown is the perfect solution to it, you're almost certain it's not. And that's why actually investing in businesses that have been out there a little bit, even if it's a tiny bit, if they've got a product there and they've got a bit of evidence of it already working or not working, or working in certain places and not in other bits, that's much more appealing. And then, having decent margins. I mean, at business school, we learned about forgiving margins. If you have to build a business that's the margins are always going to be very tight. That's going to be a real struggle at the beginning, because the margins will be even tighter because things won't go according to plan. But frankly, a lot of the stuff that you see in a business plan, I mean, it's got to be there, but it's not. I don't read it because I sort of flick through it. But it's the people. It's the people. It's not necessarily because they've done it before. Sometimes that helps, but often it's just their determination, their understanding of the market, their love for the particular product. It's the point of it's infectious. All of those things are most important.
Yeah,
LA Brewery is a good example of this. I sort of see the business as it's been going around for 5 or 6 years now, but the years up to the pandemic, we produced delicious drinks, but they all had to be chilled.
Yes. And
that limited where we could sell massively. But where we did sell, they sold very well. But it just limited you. And then during the pandemic, we sort of didn't really have very many customers because we were selling into hospitality. So it gave us time to sort of rethink it. And so we worked out how to make them so they could be sold ambient. And we also went online because we had to.
Yeah, like a lot of people did over
Like
the
a lot of
pandemic.
people did. And the online business is now the biggest part of it. And unlike a lot of food and drink products, it really lends itself. It turns out people are buying, kombucha, or particularly our kombucha, as an alternative to wine. And they're buying it in the same way as they would buy wine or beer. So the average order size is very significant. If we put green and blacks online, had that been an option back in whenever it was, I don't think people would have spent 50 odd quid on their first order of chocolate.
Although I tend to spend a lot of money at Pump Street chocolate.
Yeah, but it's very good chocolate. And you are very unusual, Micah.
In a good way, hopefully.
In a good way. But you are quite weird when it comes to food.
Yeah.
Should we? Have they done a podcast on you yet?
No. Oh, here. Yes,
Yeah.
we did one on me. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I can't remember how it went, actually.
Oh, I'm sure it was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, you were editing it, so hopefully it's okay.
When I just met Micah, and he said to me, we were at Covent Garden Soup, and he said, "What are you doing at the weekend?" I said, "I'm going to be cooking some muntjac," and thinking he wouldn't know what muntjac is. As a Londoner, he wouldn't know what it is. And he came out 5 minutes later with 10 recipes for muntjac from his famous Laotian cookbook.
Yes, I just bought it.
Which you just bought. I mean, most people don't have most people don't have a cookbook from Laos at all. Not sure how you pronounce Laotian, but anyway, but you got 10 recipes which you photocopied for me.
Yeah.
I've still got them actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah. That's quite weird, isn't it? Well, it's unusual. It's not weird. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Oh, an encyclopedia is Micah.
Yeah.
Any questions regarding any kind of food? We turn to Micah.
Often it's just opinions.
Yeah.
My biggest success so far is I am plant-based, so I don't eat meat at all.
Yeah.
And Micah has recently turned to the world of beans and legumes.
The bold beans, for instance.
Yeah, we love bold beans.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's a really nice point we have to talk about now.
Yeah, we have something to talk about now, which is lovely. It was just silence before. Something I sort of, before we get on to the last sort of questions, which we go through with all the people we interview, but you've been either a managing director or a chairman of a number of companies and led them successfully. What do you think makes you a good leader? What do you think are the qualities that you have that help with this?
I've led some unsuccessful ones as well, but I don't think that necessarily alters your question. And I'm not, obviously it's nice of you to suggest that I am a good leader. So I'll rise to that. And, I have a particular style of leadership. I mentioned Jeff, who you knew, who was our chair, and he said to me quite early on in our relationship as my chair, he said, there's a fine line between delegation and abdication, and you tread it more than anyone else I've ever met. And I was so flattered at the time. I was probably at a complete super arrogance stage of my life, and I just thought, well, that's really nice. That's so flattering. I look at it and I think, actually, was he just trying to tell me something quite critical? But it's absolutely true. There's nothing I like more than letting people get on with it. And I think that's sort of, that's the best type of leadership. But obviously it totally depends on having people who are capable of getting on with it, and you have no weak links or not very weak links. But if you can get away with it, and if you can attract people who like that style of leadership, then what's not to like about it? Because you can go on and do something else. But I certainly don't have, as I said, I don't need to be flying the plane. I'm very happy, but I do need to have a dialogue with whoever happens to be flying the plane at the time.
It's a good analogy.
But I think that I find the sort of autocratic or hierarchical leadership that you tend to see in big businesses very, very unattractive. It just doesn't work for me, and therefore I assume it doesn't work for other people. I mean, it obviously does work for some people. Some people like just to be told what to do.
Yeah.
And some people really hate, and I've had a few examples where let everyone get on with it. You've seen people just sink and drown, and it's awful when that happens. So, and I hope I've got better at spotting that and either rescuing people and helping them, or realizing that helping them realize they're in the wrong place. But that's how I choose to operate. I do a lot of different things. So being a chair, I don't managing direct anything anymore, because that really would be pushing my luck. But I do a lot of things, and I do that because I know what I'm good at, where I can be helpful, but I haven't really got a lot of time to sit around where other people can do a much better job than me.
That's good advice, or good way of sort of explaining.
Well, it's quite important, because I think a lot of entrepreneur managers tend not to trust people.
Yeah.
And so if you don't trust people, it becomes a self-fulfilling
it doesn't
the outcome, because the people most likely to be trusted leave.
Yes.
Or don't ever arrive in the first place.
We found that at Tastehead is getting people to give autonomy, trust people, let them get on with it. But obviously help them when they need to be helped and advice, etc. Right, wrap up questions. We ask all our guests, which other brands inspire you the most? It doesn't have to be a food; it could be a non-food.
I'm very promiscuous in my loyalties when it comes to brands. I've been married to the same person, or for however many years, 40 years. So, but I just think that. So we were talking about Bold Bean. I think Bold Bean is a really good brand. That's my sort of brand of 2023.
Yeah.
And I met Amelia before she started, and I hope I gave her a little bit of advice and have done along the way. But I'm not claiming any response. I think she's a genius. When she said to me, "I'm going to be selling delicious beans in jars at about 3 times the price of other delicious beans in jars," you thought, well, good luck to you. That's not going to work. But I love beans, so give it a go. And I think that they are delicious.
They are, yeah.
And it's working. And I thought her cookbook was fantastic. And it's
got that as well.
Apparently a bestseller. And it takes quite a lot for me to buy a new cookbook these days. But I'm working my way through all of them. We sell them in our little farm shop. So she's she's a star attraction. Another young person's brand, not a food one, is Purdy and Fig. I don't know if you know that, but it's a cleaning products brand. It's all online. Again, I met the two guys behind it. I mean, they're running it, and one of their mums started it. I think she's Purdy, not Fig, but anyway, the mums are my age, and these two guys are in their 20s, and they came to me for branding advice, for marketing advice, which lasted about 5 minutes, and then I had 2 hours pumping them, trying to understand how they had managed to get this business from nothing to doing, I don't know, something like £1 million a month online, and just their understanding of the D2C market. And I mean, they came saying they thought their brand wasn't as strong as it could be, but I mean, God,
sounds like it's
exactly. So those are my two sort of 2023 brands. I'll probably move on a bit,
so
although
else next
yeah,
year.
exactly.
Yeah.
Although they'll do. I can't believe they will fall by the wayside, because I'm very impressed by both.
Yeah. Now more on sort of personal food and drink. I'm going to combine these two questions: your desert island dish, or your favourite restaurant, or both.
God, I don't go to many restaurants. When I get my
we're always talking about them, aren't we?
I know. So I always ask you, and I follow your advice. But I'm quite often disappointed in really good restaurants, not because they don't live up to expectations. It's just I love ingredients, and so I'm much more excited about going to a market or going to a farm, coming back with something that's sort of ultra fresh, or and then sort of cooking it as little as possible. Really, not not mucking around with it. So I'm ducking the question. I mean, favorite restaurants at the moment. I try and support restaurants in Suffolk. We've got the Suffolk in High Street in Aldborough, which was set up.
Not been yet, but I do want to go.
And it's great. I mean, and George Pell, who's bravely who's running the Scargo in London, and obviously during the pandemic, everything sort of shut down, and he moved to Suffolk for the summer when it was sort of the eat out to help out phase, and everyone was so excited to be able to eat out and help out in a seaside town, and he fell in love with Aldborough, and he's brought a whole. I mean, we've got some great food in Suffolk,
lovely,
and he's brought a sort of, I don't know, London theatre and great service, and there are lots of other restaurants around there, and the ones I talk to say it's great that he's here, because he's kind of raised the game as well. So, and there are quite a few other people in Suffolk. There's the Greyhound pub, which I think you've been to.
Yeah, I haven't, but I've heard of that. The one that I loved was Darsham Nurseries, but they sadly shut as the pandemic hit.
But Nicola, who was the head chef, there's created a place called the Canteen in Aldborough, and then we've got in Southwold, and then we've got a little cafe in our farmyard now,
Yes,
and we're building her a new. We're building, so that's Alice. Her restaurant's called Pinch. She's an amazing chef, and we're building a new restaurant due to open this spring for
lovely.
her. Cafe restaurant.
Summer.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. She's going to make the best pizza in probably the world, certainly in Suffolk.
Ooh, I'll be the judge of that.
I know. Well, I mean, she's bought a very, very
expensive
big,
oven.
Expensive oven, so it better be. Yeah.
Okay, my last question is: do you have a book, podcast, or any other sort of resource that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Well, I mean, I don't listen to. I mean, obviously, going to listen to your podcast now, Micah, but I'm not very good at listening to podcasts. I mean, I have so many papers to read that I become a really bad reader as well. But I read about. My real interest is farming now.
Yeah.
I started as a farmer and I sort of ran away from it, but a real interest is farming, and so I read endlessly about the soil. And my wife can't believe it. She looks by the side of the bed, and there's just yet another book on soil or on nature conservation or whatever. I mean, I always say my favourite book is called The History of the Countryside, and it was written by Professor Oliver Rackham, and it's sort of it's the start of hundreds of other books that are now being written about understanding what we have lost or what we we could lose even more of to the destruction of the whole species. And he wrote a book explaining what's still there, why it was there, and how it fitted in. And the reason I feel particularly fond of it is that he was a professor at my university and my college at Cambridge, and he was quite eccentric. And I sat there watching this man for 3 years, and I've occasionally said hello to him or whatever. But I mean, it's just it was such a missed opportunity. This great man who I read his book way after I left, and he's dead now. And yet he's such an influence. And yet I had 3 years of sitting, as a student, not doing the same subject as him, and I could have just talked to him. And I think it's a sort of reminder to all of us of missed opportunities or whatever. But the consolation is that he wrote this great book, which I have read, and
I'll be reading it.
Yeah,
it's have to be on my list. But look, William, I could have chatted for ages, and we always do anyway whenever I see you. But thanks for joining us on the podcast today. It's been great chatting to you again.
Well, really nice to be here. Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to Parsons Green.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And for more information, please visit tastehead.com. We hope you join us for our next episode.